That dirt road is a private community asset now, Mr. Reyes, and you'll need our written permission to use it." That was Diane Pruitt, president of the Carver Ridge Homeowners Association. Standing in the middle of a gravel lane my grandfather graded by hand in 1961. She said it to me on a Tuesday morning while I was hauling a load of cedar out to a job. And she said it the way a person says a thing they have practiced in the mirror. The road she was claiming ran across the lower corner of my 40 acres. It had carried my family's trucks for 3 generations. And what Diane did not know, what she never once bothered to check in the 2 years she spent making my life smaller, was that the only paved bridge connecting her entire development to the county highway sat on a parcel that had nothing to do with the county at all. I'm going to tell you the whole thing, because if you own land near one of these places, you need to hear how it went. First, though, let me ask you something. If a woman in white sneakers stood in your driveway and told you the road your grandfather built was now hers, and that you needed her signature to drive your own trucks home, what would you have done? Hold on to your answer. I want you to compare it to mine at the end. My name is Marcus Reyes. I'm 58 years old, and I run a one-man custom mill workshop out of a pole barn on land my family has held since before the war. 40 acres of mixed timber and pasture on the east slope of a ridge that the county map still calls Carver Hollow. There is white oak up top, a stand of black walnut my grandfather planted as a boy that is worth more now than the house, and a creek bottom where the morning fog sits until 10. My grandfather bought it for almost nothing when the bottom fell out of the timber market, cleared a building site with a borrowed dozer, and graded an access lane down to the old county road himself, hauling the crushed rock 1 truckload at a time. He kept every receipt. He kept every survey, stake. He had the boundary professionally surveyed in 1961 and recorded the plat at the county that same year, and he taught my father to do the same, and my father taught me. And so I am the kind of man who has a manila folder for everything labeled in pencil, stacked in a fireproof box bolted to the floor of the barn. I learned the folder, habit, the hard way, but I'll get to that. For now, know that when Diane Pruitt started in on me, I did not raise my voice, and I did not call a lawyer. I went to the box. I pulled a fresh folder. I wrote a date on the tab, and I started filing. The box itself was my father's idea, and the way I came to trust it tells you most of what you need to know about this family. In 1988, a utility company ran a gas line survey through the hollow and decided on a clerk's bad afternoon that our property line sat 40 feet east of where it actually sat. They sent a crew to clear a right-of-way that would have taken out my grandfather's apple trees. My father did not argue with the crew. He went to the barn, opened the fireproof box, and came back with a recorded survey and a photograph of the original iron pins set in concrete in 1961. He laid them on the hood of the foreman's truck without a word. The crew packed up and left by noon. I was 21 years old, and I watched a single sheet of paper stop a backhoe cold, and I never forgot the lesson. The folder is not paperwork. The folder is the thing that does the fighting, so your hands stay clean. So I built my own box when the land came to me, bolted to the floor of the barn beside the kiln, and I filled it the way my father filled his. Permits, inspections, tax receipts, the deed, the survey, every letter anyone in authority had ever sent me, each in its own labeled sleeve. People who visited the shop thought it was a quirk, an old man's tidiness. It was a loaded gun that never needed cleaning. My wife, Elena, would have laughed at the woman in the white sneakers. Elena died 4 years ago, in the spring, and she is the reason the land still feels like a person to me and not a deed. She grew up in town in a rented duplex. And when she married me and came up the hollow, she fell in love with the idea of ground, that nobody could ever make you leave. She used to sit on the porch with our daughter and name the birds, and she kept a coffee can of wildflower seed by the door and scattered a handful every spring along the access road, so that by June, the gravel lane my grandfather graded ran between two ribbons of black-eyed Susan and chicory. She made me promise, near the end, when she was thin and tired, and the medicine had stopped pretending to work, that I would not sell to the developers who came sniffing every time the county talked about widening the highway. She had watched them circle for years. She knew what they wanted before I did. "They'll wait until you're worn down," she told me. "Don't let them wear you down." I promised. I keep my promises in the same place. I keep my receipts. Our daughter is Nina. She was 14 when her mother died, and she is 18 now, finishing her last year of high school, and she lives with me in the house my grandfather framed. Nina is the one who started recording things. She is the one who, the very first week, looked up from her phone at the kitchen table and said, "Dad, write down what she said. Write down the exact words." I did. That was folder number 1. Carver Ridge went up over 6 years ago on the old Hadley dairy farm, the flat ground across the creek from my ridge. A developer named Bram Foley bought the dairy, drained the low pasture, and put in 80-some houses with vinyl siding and 2-car garages and a sign at the entrance with a fake lighthouse on it, though we are 300 miles from any ocean. The development sits in a bowl. There is exactly one way in and out of that bowl by car, and that is a 2-lane paved bridge over Carver Creek that Foley's company built to connect the new streets to the county highway. Here is the part Diane never thought about. When Foley built that bridge, the creek was running high, and the cheapest place to anchor, the far abutment, was a half-acre shelf of rock that stuck out from the toe of my ridge. That rock shelf was mine. It had been my grandfather's, then my father's, then mine, free and clear, recorded at the county in 1961, with a survey so clean you could eat off it. Foley's people poured the bridge footing onto my rock without ever buying it, without an easement, without so much as a phone call. They were in a hurry, and they assumed an old man in a hollow would never notice. My father noticed. My father noticed in 2004 when the work started, and instead of making noise, he did what we do. He walked down to the creek every morning that summer with a thermos of coffee and watched them work, and he took photographs, dated on the back in his careful hand of the forms going up against our rock. He had his surveyor friend, the same Hollis Yoder I'd call years later, shoot the footing against our recorded pin, and Hollis confirmed in writing that the concrete sat 11 feet onto our parcel. My father filed it, all in a folder, the one I'd opened 11 years on, and one evening on the porch he set it in my lap and said, "Son, someday these people are going to need this rock more than we do. A bridge can't move. When that day comes, you be ready, and you don't gloat, and you don't threaten. You just lay the paper down and let it talk." Then he put the folder in the box, and we waited 11 years for the day to come. It came on a Tuesday. In the person of Diane Pruitt, I should tell you how it started, before the road, because the road was step 4, not step 1. The first contact was almost friendly. 2 years ago, in the fall, Diane drove her white SUV up my lane, the one with the vanity plate that read RIGQN, and parked it crooked across my turnaround like she owned the gravel. She had a clipboard. She had a lanyard with a laminated badge she had clearly made herself. And she had on a linen blazer and white tennis shoes on a logging road in October. "Mr. Reyes," she said, smiling, the way a hostess smiles, "I'm Diane Pruitt, president of the Carver Ridge Homeowners Association. I wanted to introduce myself and talk about bringing your property into harmony with our community standards." I told her my property had been in harmony with this hollow for 60 years, and I wasn't aware it belonged to her community. "Well, that's the thing," she said. "Carver Ridge has grown. Your parcel is functionally part of our viewshed now, and the board feels that the appearance of your structures affects our property values." My structures. She meant the pole barn and the lumber racks and the kiln. I told her they were permitted, inspected, and older than her development. She wrote something on her clipboard anyway, and she said the board would be in touch, and she drove off without ever asking a single question about who I was or what the land was. That was the whole woman right there in the first 5 minutes. She never asked. She never checked. She arrived already certain. Nina watched the SUV go from the porch. She didn't even look at the survey markers. Nina said, "They're right there by her tire." They were. That was folder number 1. The letters started a week later. The first one informed me that the Carver Ridge HOA had determined my lumber racks were in violation of a community aesthetic covenant and assessed a fine of $200. I had never signed a covenant. I had never bought a house in Carver Ridge. I owned 40 acres of timberland that predated the entire development by half a century, and a woman 300 yards away had decided I owed her $200 for stacking my own wood on my own ground. I filed the letter. I did not pay. I wrote one line on a legal pad. Fine number 1, $200. No jurisdiction. The second letter came 2 weeks after that, and it doubled the fine for non-payment and added a new violation for the color of my barn roof, which is green, which it has been since before Bram Foley ever saw the Hadley Dairy. The letter called the green non-conforming to the community palette. There was no community palette. There was no community that included me. $400 now. I filed it. Fine number 2. By the new year, the letters were coming every 2 weeks, each one a little angrier, each one adding a violation she had invented over coffee. My gravel was the wrong gravel. My gate was the wrong height. The sound of my planer between 9 and 5 was a nuisance to the community. The fines stacked. By the end of that first winter, the HOA claimed I owed them $3,600, and I had not paid a cent, and every letter was in a folder with a date on the tab. This is the part where most people would have hired an attorney and spent $10,000 to be told they were right, which they already knew. I didn't. And I want you to understand why, because it matters for the lesson at the end. I didn't. Because a lawyer answers a letter, and answering a letter tells the other side you're afraid of it. I wasn't afraid of the letters. I was building a record. Every unpaid fine, every invented violation, every certified mail receipt was a brick in a wall. Diane Pruitt was building around herself, and she was paying for the bricks. That spring, the harassment moved off paper and onto my customers. I do custom work, mostly for builders and a few wealthy folks putting up cabins on the far side of the ridge, and word came back to me that someone had been calling them. A man named Owen Hatch, who had hired me to mill the staircase for a lodge he was building, called me one morning, and his voice was careful. "Marcus," he said, "I got a call from a woman. Said she was with some county aesthetic board. Said you were operating an illegal mill, and any work you did might not pass inspection. That true?" It was not true. There is no county aesthetic board. I sat down on the bench by the kiln, and I told Owen exactly that. Slow, so it would land. I told him I had been milling on this ridge for 30 years, that every piece of equipment in my shop was permitted and inspected, and that there was no such thing as a county aesthetic board anywhere in this state. I told them to ask the woman for her county employee number next time, and to write down the date and time she called, and the exact words she used. Owen was quiet for a second. Then he said she knew the name of my lodge, Marcus. She knew the address. How does an aesthetic board know the address of a private bill that hasn't even got a sign up yet? That stopped me, because he was right, and the answer was ugly. The only way she knew about Owen Hatch's lodge was that she had gone looking through my business, asking around, building a list of the people who paid me, so she could call them one by one and dry up my income. This was not a woman protecting property values. This was a campaign. Owen was a good man, and he did better than just take my word for it. He recorded the next call because she called him twice more, and the second time she named herself outright. Diane Pruitt, Carver Ridge HOA. Dropping the fiction of the county board the moment she got impatient. Owen sent me the recording and a signed note about the dates and what was said. I filed it. That was the day the folder for fake authority got its own tab. And that was the day I stopped thinking of this as a nuisance and started thinking of it as a thing with a plan behind it. Here's what I started to understand that spring. Diane was not just a busybody with a clipboard. Diane was running interference for something. Because the same spring she was calling my customers, the county opened public comment on the highway widening. The one the developers had wanted for years, and Bram Foley's name was on the petition in favor. And so was the name Pruitt. Diane's husband, it turned out, was Garrett Pruitt. And Garrett Pruitt was Foley's partner in a second development, a planned 90-unit Phase 2 that would go up on the slope just below my ridge, if and only if the highway got widened and a second access route got approved. And the cheapest second access route, the one drawn on Foley's own plans, the one that would save them building a whole new bridge, ran straight across the lower corner of my 40 acres, my access road. The gravel lane, my grandfather graded by hand. That was the real game. They did not want my barn gone for the view shed. They wanted my road. They wanted a right-of-way across my lower corner so Phase 2 could connect to the county highway without spending $2 million on a new bridge. And the fastest way to get a right-of-way from a stubborn man is to make his life so expensive and so exhausting that he signs anything to make it stop. The fines were not the point. The fines were the pressure. The road was the prize. I want to pause here because this is the moment the whole thing turned for me, and it might be the moment it turns for you if you're ever in it. The second you understand that the petty harassment is a means to a specific end, you stop reacting to the harassment and you start defending the end. I stopped reading Diane's letters as insults. I started reading them as evidence of intent. And I went back to the box and I pulled my father's folder, the one labeled in his handwriting, and I laid the photographs of Foley's bridge footing on my kitchen table, and I looked at the survey and I understood what my father had understood 11 years before. They needed my rock for their existing bridge. And now they wanted my road for their next one. And I owned both. The escalation that summer came fast, and I'm going to count it for you the way I counted it on the legal pad, because the count is the case. In June, the HOA filed a civil suit against me for the unpaid fines, now totaling $5,100. In county small claims, that was escalation number 5. In July, a man in a polo shirt with a clipboard showed up at my gate claiming to be a county code inspector, and when I asked for his credentials, he could not produce a county ID, only a laminated card with the Carver Ridge Lighthouse logo on it. He told me he was there to perform a compliance walkthrough of my structures and that I was required to let him onto the property. I told him no county inspector announces himself with an HOA logo, and I asked him his name, and he wouldn't give it. When Nina came out onto the porch and started filming him plain as day, holding her phone up so he could see it, he stopped talking mid-sentence, got back in his car, and backed down the lane fast enough to spray gravel. The car had a Carver Ridge resident parking sticker on the windshield, and Nina caught the plate clean on video. Fake inspector. Escalation number 6, on video, filed by that evening. In August, Diane stood in my access road and blocked it. That was the Tuesday I started with. She had 2 other board members with her, a heavy-set man in an HOA polo and a nervous-looking woman who kept glancing back toward the development, and a folding sign that read, Prive, Community Road, NO Unauthorized Access, and she had planted it in my gravel, on my land, 300 feet inside my own property line. The morning was already hot. My planer had been running, and I'd come out to load. And there she was, standing in the lane between me and the county road, her white SUV parked sideways to make a wall of it. She told me the road was a community asset, and I needed written permission to use it. I had a flatbed loaded with cedar for Owen Hatch's lodge, and an order due that afternoon, and she stood in front of my truck with her arms crossed and her white sneakers in my grandfather's gravel, and she said it again, louder, so the board members could hear. This road is functionally part of our jurisdiction, Mr. Reyes. You can apply for an access permit at the next board meeting. The fee is $500. A permit to drive my own road. Escalation number 7. The heavy-set man in the polo looked at his shoes. The nervous woman looked at the trees. Only Diane looked at me, chin up, certain as Sunday, and I understood that she genuinely believed she was in the right, that the certainty was not an act. That is the thing about people like Diane. They are not lying when they tell you your land is theirs. They have simply never once considered that they might be wrong, and nobody has ever made them check. I did not argue with her. I want you to hear that. Because it's the hardest part and the most important, I did not get out of the truck and shout. I did not move her sign. I took out my phone standing right there, and I photographed the sign, and I photographed her standing on my land, and I photographed the survey pin 8 feet from her left shoe. Then I called the sheriff's department, and I reported a group of people trespassing on my property and obstructing my access. And I waited. The deputy who came was named Ray Soto. And Ray Soto is the kind of officer this whole thing depends on, so let me be fair to him. He did not know whose land it was. He could not know. He got a call about a dispute, and he had to roll on it and sort it out on the ground. And when he got there, he had 2 parties each saying the road was theirs. Diane had a printed HOA map showing the road as a community asset. I had a recorded survey from 1961 and a deed in a folder. In my truck, Ray looked at both. He was careful. He said the words, "A good officer says, Mr. Reyes, I can't settle a property line in the road. That's a civil matter. Now, if your deed and survey hold up at the county, this sign is on your land, and it comes out, build your record, get it verified. Until then, I'd ask both of you to keep the peace." Then he looked at Diane's printed map, the one with no surveyor's seal and no recording stamp. And he looked at my survey with the county clerk's stamp from 1961. and I watched something move behind his eyes. He didn't have to. He told Diane that a printed map from a homeowners association is not a legal survey, and that she should not be planting signs or blocking a man's access until a court said the road was hers. Diane told Deputy Soto that he was being deceived by an old man's forged paperwork in those words, and Ray Soto wrote that down in his own notebook. She did not understand that everything she said in front of that deputy was going into a record too. She pulled the sign that day, but only because Ray asked her to. Within a week, she had filed for a restraining injunction to keep me from interfering with community infrastructure, meaning my own road. And she had the HOA's lawyer, a man named Kurt Lemke, send me a letter demanding I grant an emergency access easement across my lower corner for public safety. The county might need that route for emergency vehicles. That was the tell. That was Foley's right-of-way, dressed up as an ambulance. I filed the letter, escalation number 8. And then I did the thing my father told me to be ready for, 11 years before. And I want you to watch how quiet it was, because the quiet is the whole point. I drove to the county recorder's office on a Thursday morning. I had been there 100 times over the years, for tax matters and a boundary question once, and the clerk behind the counter knew me by name. I pulled the full chain of title on the Carver Ridge Bridge parcel and the abutment under it, and I sat at the long oak table in the records room with the old plat books open in front of me and traced the line backward, parcel by parcel, year by year. The bridge abutment, the rock shelf, had never left my family. It ran from my grandfather in 1961 straight down to me, unbroken. No easement ever granted, no lease, no encroachment agreement. And the bridge footing, Foley poured in 2004, sat squarely on top of it. The clerk made me certified copies, stamped and dated, and I paid the small fee in cash, and I filed every page. I confirmed in black and white, recorded and stamped, what my father's folder already told me. The far abutment of the only vehicle bridge into Carver Ridge sat on my rock shelf. The bridge that 86 families used to get to work, to get their kids to school, to get an ambulance in, if they ever needed one, was anchored on land I owned outright, with no easement, no lease, and no recorded permission of any kind. For 16 years, Bram Foley's bridge had been trespassing on my family's ground, and nobody at Carver Ridge had the first idea. I did not call the newspaper. I did not put up my own sign. I went to see a surveyor, the same retired man my father had used, a careful old professional named Hollis Yoder, and I had him do 2 things. First, reshoot the bridge footing against my recorded pins, to confirm in a fresh signed survey that the abutment was on my parcel. It was, by 11 feet. Second, walk my access road against the deed, to confirm the gravel lane was entirely within my 40 acres. It was, by a comfortable margin the whole way. Hollis signed and sealed both. I filed them. 2 folders, 2 seals, 1 quiet Thursday. Then I made an offer Bram Foley could not see coming, because it didn't come at Bram Foley at all. The half-acre abutment parcel was technically a separate sliver in the old county records, carved off in a tax quirk decades back, and it had been sitting unsold in a dead developer's estate the whole time. I bought it. Cleanly, legally, for $11,000, recorded and stamped the deed in my name by the end of September. I now owned not just the rock the bridge footing sat on, which I'd always owned, but the entire legal approach parcel on the far side, the strip of ground every car in Carver Ridge crossed the instant it left the bridge. I owned the only ground their only bridge touched on its way to the highway. I owned the bridge's feet, and I owned the bridge's doorway. And I had 2 sealed surveys and a clean recorded deed to prove all of it. Did I block their bridge? No. I want to be clear about that, because that is the line I would not cross, and the line you should not cross either. There were families in that bowl. There were kids and old people and folks who had no idea their developer had built their only road onto another man's land. I would never strand them. Blocking that bridge would have made me the very thing Diane pretended I was. I did not touch it. I simply, quietly, owned the truth of it, and I filed the truth in a folder, and I waited for the one place where the truth would have to be read out loud. That place was the County Planning Commission, on the second Tuesday of October, where the highway widening and the Phase 2 access route were on the public agenda. Diane Pruitt and Garrett Pruitt and Bram Foley were all there, dressed for it, with glossy renderings on an easel and a lawyer at the table, ready to ask the county to approve a new access road, my access road, across my lower corner, condemned for public use if I would not sign. The renderings showed clean new streets and a second bridge that would never be built because they intended to use mine instead of paying for it. Kurt Lemke stood up first and told the commission that a single uncooperative landowner was standing in the way of public safety and regional growth, and that the proposed route across the Reyes parcel was the only feasible second access for the Carver Ridge community. He said my name like it was a problem to be managed. He had no idea what was sitting in the folder on my lap. I sat in the back with Nina beside me and a folder in my lap when the chair opened public comment. I walked to the podium. I did not raise my voice. I've never once in this whole story raised my voice, and I wasn't going to start in a county building. I said my name, and that I owned the 40 acres in question, and that I had 3 documents the commission needed to see before it voted on anyone's access to anything. I laid the first one down. The recorded survey of my access road sealed by Hollis Yoder, showing the gravel lane lay entirely within my deeded property. No public right-of-way, no community asset, no jurisdiction. The county surveyor, a neutral staffer named Paula Briggs, came up to the table to look at it because that is her job. And she read the seal and the recording stamp, and she nodded once and said, to the chair, "The road is on his land." Then I laid down the second document, the chain of title on the bridge abutment, and the third, Hollis Yoder's fresh sealed survey showing the only vehicle bridge into Carver Ridge, was anchored 11 feet onto my parcel, and that I had since purchased and recorded the entire approach parcel on the far side, and that every resident of Carver Ridge crossed my private ground every single time they drove to the highway, with no easement and no recorded permission of any kind. The room went very quiet. Paula Briggs looked at the chain of title for a long moment. Then she looked up at the commission chair, and she said the sentence that ended it. If this is accurate, and the seals say it is, then the applicant's own community has no legal access to the county highway. Their bridge is on his land. They're in no position to be condemning his road. They have a bigger problem of their own. Diane Pruitt stood up. I'll give her that. She stood up and she said loud, in a county chamber on the public record, that parcel is functionally part of our community, and his so-called deed is a forgery from an old man trying to extort us. She said it the same way. She'd said it to me in my driveway, and to Owen Hatch on the phone, and to Deputy Soto on my road. The third, voice time in the worst possible room. She looked at the recording stamp, and she said flatly, "Ma'am, I'm the county surveyor. This deed is recorded, and these seals are mine to verify. It's not a forgery. Here are the paired numbers I want you to hold." In 2 years, the Carver Ridge HOA had assessed against me $5,100 in fines and collected zero, not $1. My record was clean, every fine unpaid, because every fine was lawless. And on the other side of the ledger, the development that tried to take my road had been crossing my land illegally with 86 households for 16 years, and now owed me, by the county's own emergency access valuation, something north of $400,000 for a retroactive easement. Zero collected from me. $400,000 owed to me. That was the gap, and the whole room could see it. The commission tabled the Phase 2 access route that night. Permanently, as it turned out. You cannot approve a new road for a development whose existing road sits on the very man's land you were about to condemn. The widening petition lost its anchor tenant. And within a month, the consequences fell exactly where the overreach had come from, which is the only kind of justice I trust. The county, now aware that 86 homes had no legal access to a public highway, required Carver Ridge to remedy the trespass on my abutment. Foley's company had to come to me, hat in hand, and negotiate a recorded easement for their own bridge, the one they'd stolen the footing for in 2004. I did not gouge them. I am not Diane. I granted the easement recorded and permanent for a fair number that Hollis, Yoder, and a county appraiser set together, and I put a clause in it that the access road across my lower corner was mine in perpetuity and no future board could ever touch it. They paid. They had no choice. Their own bridge required it. Garrett Pruitt and Bram Foley's Phase 2 never broke ground. Without the second access, the financing collapsed, and the bank called the note on the land they'd optioned below my ridge. Bram Foley sold out of the partnership at a loss and left the county within the year. Garrett Pruitt's name came off the highway petition, and the widening, which had only ever been about getting his and Foley's trucks to market, quietly died in committee. And Diane Pruitt, who had told a sworn county officer that a recorded deed was a forgery, drew the attention of the HOA's own membership, because all of this was public now. All of it on the record she herself had built. The board called a special meeting in the development clubhouse, the one with the fake lighthouse on the sign outside. And for once, Diane was not the one running it. The defector who finally spoke was a quiet woman named Joan Petrie, a board member who had signed some of those fine letters under Diane's instruction and never felt right about it. Joan stood up at that meeting with a folder of her own, because it turns out the habit is contagious, and she read out, line by line, how much HOA money Diane had spent. $11,000 on the lawyer Kurt Lemke. $6,000 more on the surveyor who drew the false community map. Hundreds of dues payer dollars on certified mailings. All of it chasing a man who had never owed them a dime and now owned the ground their own homes depended on. The room, I'm told, went the same kind of quiet the planning commission had gone. Diane Pruitt resigned as president before the vote to remove her could finish. The fines against me were voided in the same motion, every one of them. $5,100, erased by the people who'd let her invent it. I drove home that night with Nina in the truck, down the gravel lane my grandfather graded by hand, past the spot where a folding sign had stood in August, and there was nothing there now but my own clean road and the dark shapes of my own trees. Nina was quiet for a while. Then she said Mom would have liked Paula Briggs, and she would have. Elena always did love the people who simply did their jobs and did not perform. We pulled up to the barn, and I sat for a second with the engine ticking. Nina pulled out her phone, the same phone she'd filmed the fake inspector with, and she opened the very first note she'd made 2 years before, at the kitchen table. The exact words Diane said the first day. She read them back to me in the dark, and then she deleted the note, and she said, "We don't need it anymore. We didn't. The folders had done their work. The box could go quiet again. I kept Elena's promise. The land is not for sale, and now it never can be taken. Not by a board, not by a petition, not by a developer who pours a footing on another man's rock and assumes the man will never look. The road my grandfather built is mine, and it is Nina's after me, recorded and sealed and safe. So here's the lesson. Plainly, the way I'd tell it to you, across my own fence. Do not answer their letters with anger. Answer them with a folder. The day anyone with a clipboard tells you that your land is functionally theirs, go to the county recorder that same week and pull your deed, pull your survey, and walk your boundary against the ground with your own 2 feet. Find your pins, photograph them, learn where the other person's structures actually sit, because the people who overreach are almost never standing on solid ground themselves. Keep every letter, every fine, every certified receipt, and never pay a fine you do not owe, because an unpaid lawless fine is not a debt. It is evidence. The deed that is older and cleaner than the claim will win every single time, but only if you can put your hands on it. Build the box, label the folders, walk the line. The quiet record beats the loud clipboard, and it is not even close. If you've got a story like this, a time some board or office told you your own ground wasn't yours, put it in the comments, because I read them, and so do a lot of folks who are right now standing in their own driveway wondering what to do. Subscribe if you want the next one, because next week I'm telling you about a retired bridge engineer whose HOA fined him for the dock his father built, never once asking why a bridge engineer might know exactly where the high water line is recorded. That one ends at a dam. I'll see you then.